Okay, so now we're going to get into theories of human development. I'm going to outline two of the most common ones that you'll see on the MCAT, and I do see them a lot. So this is basically, Psych and Soc is basically just raw content review. It's pretty much you're just going to have to, get through the material, review it, and make sure it stays up there. So we're going to go through it. Again, like I've said a million times, feel free to go back to the YouTube lectures. You can slow them down. You can use captions, anything that's going to help you study. You can print out our slides, make notes on them, look them over. So the first theory that we're going to go over is Freud's theory of psychosexual development. And we have Sigmund Freud right over there chilling to the right. So Sigmund Freud put forth a theory of human development through the lens of his psychosexual analysis. As I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, he was famous for his psychosexual analysis, psychodynamic, the id, ego, and superego. So he believed that the way in which humans channel their sexual energy throughout childhood was a major factor in personality formation when they reached adulthood. And he split these up into different categories. Yes, a wild man indeed. Wild doesn't even cover it. So he believed that the way in which humans, I read that already, he believed specifically that the first 5 years of humans' life were crucial in personality formation. So this was when he believed humans developed the ego and superego to counteract the primal urges that resulted from the it. So just to do a super quick review of that, the three components of personality, we have the ego, the superego, and the id. The id is your primal desires, sexual desires that are often inappropriate in a social context. The superego is your ideals, your values, the person that you strive to be. So those two aspects of your personality pretty much compete. And the ego is sort of the mediator of the two. So the ego is what is expressed and what is socially acceptable in that moment. Right. So if someone did not resolve the major conflict during one of these stages, they would develop a fixation that would persist throughout adulthood. So we're going to go through the stages, and we are going to talk about those fixations a little bit more. So stage one is the oral stage. So that goes from birth to about 1 year of age. So basically, Freud believed that all children had sexual energy, and basically everything, whenever you study Freud, everything comes back to channeling sexual energy. It doesn't matter how old you are, it doesn't matter who you are, anything having to do with you. So every single person on this earth, from birth to 1 year, he believed that your sexual energy was focused on the mouth. And infants primarily suck, bite, and breastfeed at this age. So most of the functions that babies do at that point involves their mouth. So the id, which dominates the adult's human sexual and primal desires, is responsible for this drive to pleasure in infants and children as well, like we just spoke about a little bit. So when you're in this stage, those who are not allowed to satisfy these urges during this stage are going to develop what Freud referred to as an oral fixation. So that's going to remain throughout adulthood. So an example of a few, we have smokers, nail biters, thumb suckers, all of those sort of habits that we see in adulthood that, in the year 2021, we can probably attribute them to, something else other than not being able to breastfeed when you're a year old. Freud believed that that was the main cause, and that it affects you throughout adulthood. Yep, vaping as well. And I'd also like to preface this Freud lecture with the fact that if you go to most undergrad and most graduate studies, Freud is usually taught in the literature department, not the psychology department, just because most psychologists agree today that there's not a lot of scientific merit to most of his studies. They're really great in terms of literature. They pop up in literature all the time. I mean, you could teach an entire class about one single thing that Freud has done from a literary perspective. But there's pretty much a general consensus that a lot of the stuff is unfounded. Nonetheless, it was super influential in a lot of other psychologists that came after him. Like we'll be talking about Erickson in a little bit. And a lot of his theory piggybacked off of Freud, although it's a little bit more based in science than this. So someone asked if people manifest anxiety as nail biting, is that correlated with an oral stage fixation? I'm sure Freud would definitely make the case. People today, we can probably make the connection that anxiety, we use nail biting as an outlet for anxiety. If Freud saw that someone was nail biting, he would probably opt for the explanation that there was some sort of problem in the oral stage and it resulted in a fixation. Okay, and just someone requested to go back really quickly. So this, again, stage one. Okay, no problem. So the second stage, we're moving from oral to stage two, which is anal, and that is from about 1 to 3 years old. So the child's pleasure outlet switches from the mouth to the anus. And during this stage, the child is concerned with defecation, as this is when children are potty trained. So might seem like a weird thing to be hung up on, but it's actually kind of funny because a lot of psychologists of this time really consider potty training as a super important part, interestingly enough, of personality development. And reading up on it a little bit, it's mostly because potty training is pretty much the first time in a child's life where they're being confronted with actual authority. So if you think about it, beforehand, they're pretty much doing everything according to what they need to do, because there's really no sense in training a 6-month-old. If they make a mistake, you're not going to reason with the 6-month-old. So they never had to really deal with authority. They're not in school. There's really no structure to their lives. And potty training really is that first confrontation with authority that they have. So Freud and Erikson were pretty much in agreement with that, that potty training does really establish how a child sees authority throughout their life. And consequently, children develop the ego during this stage. So the three aspects, the ego is developed, the child is developing a sense of self and a sense of how to project themselves to the outer world. A child that undergoes a harsh or early potty training experience may become what we refer to as anal retentive in adulthood. And anal retentive adults, according to Freud, were obsessively organized. They were overly respectful of authority. They're not easily strayed from their plans. They get very anxious if they're strayed from their plans. And we still do sometimes use the word anal in colloquial language to refer to people who act this way. That's actually, this is actually where the term came from. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, a child that experiences a relaxed or late potty training with parents that are not very caring about it, if they didn't grow up in that environment, they become what Freud called anal expulsive. So they become messy, unorganized, very go with the flow, not really bothered by much. So he really thought that potty training really, really affected your personality this much.